Sometimes a single act of courage can transform not just one life, but the destiny of entire communities. In the rugged wilderness of the American Southwest, where ancient traditions clash with changing times, one man's split-second decision to dive into raging waters would lead him into a world he never imagined. A world where honor runs deeper than blood, where gratitude takes forms beyond comprehension, and where the greatest rewards come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. This is the true story of how saving a life opened doors to mysteries that few outsiders have ever witnessed, and how one moment of bravery became the beginning of an extraordinary journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about family, loyalty, and what it truly means to belong somewhere. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Michael Torres adjusted the straps on his hiking pack. At 28, he had spent countless weekends exploring the wilderness areas of New Mexico, but today felt different somehow. The air carried an electric tension that made the hair on his arms stand up, and the usual chorus of birdsong seemed muted, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Michael worked as a park ranger for the state, a job that had taken him from his comfortable life in Albuquerque to remote areas most people never saw. His supervisor had sent him to check on flood damage along the Pecos River after 3 days of unusually heavy rainfall had swollen the waterways throughout the region. What should have been a routine inspection was about to become the defining moment of his life. The trail wound through dense stands of cottonwood and willow trees, their leaves rustling nervously in the humid breeze. Michael had been walking for nearly 2 hours when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the peaceful morning landscape. It was a cry, faint but unmistakably human, carried on the wind from somewhere ahead. He quickened his pace, his ranger training kicking in automatically. As he rounded a bend in the trail, the full fury of the swollen Pecos River came into view. The normally placid waterway had transformed into a raging torrent of brown water, debris, and foam. Tree branches the size of telephone poles tumbled end over end in the current, and the sound was deafening, a constant roar that seemed to shake the ground beneath his feet. That's when he saw her. About 50 yards downstream, a woman was clinging desperately to a partially submerged boulder in the middle of the river. Even from a distance, Michael could see that she was struggling against the powerful current that threatened to tear her loose at any moment. Her long black hair whipped around her face as she fought to maintain her grip on the slick rock surface. What struck Michael immediately was her size. This wasn't a typical situation where someone had simply slipped and fallen into the water. The woman was enormous, easily 6 feet tall, with a powerful, athletic build that spoke of incredible physical strength. Yet even someone of her impressive stature was no match for the river's fury. Michael's mind raced as he assessed the situation. The woman was wearing traditional Native American clothing, a long skirt and blouse that were now waterlogged and pulling her down. Her position in the middle of the river meant that any rescue attempt would be extremely dangerous. The current was moving fast enough to slam a person into the rocks downstream, and the water was deep enough to drown even a strong swimmer. He pulled out his radio to call for emergency assistance, but static was all that came through. The storm system that had caused the flooding was also interfering with communications. He tried a cell phone with the same result. No signal. The woman was on her own, and time was running out. Michael could see that her strength was fading. Her grip on the boulder was slipping, and each wave that crashed over her pushed her closer to losing her hold entirely. In a matter of minutes, maybe seconds, she would be swept away by the current. There was no time to hike back to his vehicle and drive for help. There was no time for anything except immediate action. Without hesitation, Michael began stripping off his gear. His pack, his radio, his boots, everything that might weigh him down went onto the riverbank. He had been a strong swimmer in college, but this was different. This was life or death, not just for the woman in the river, but potentially for him as well. The water was shockingly cold when he waded in, fed by snowmelt from the mountains and the recent storms. Within seconds, he could feel the current trying to grab him and pull him downstream. He had to time this perfectly. Too early, and he'd be swept past her. Too late, and she'd be gone. Michael angled himself upstream and dove into the deeper water, letting the current carry him toward the boulder where the woman clung. The force of the water was incredible, like being inside a washing machine filled with ice and debris. Something hard, a branch or a rock, struck him in the ribs, but he kept swimming. As he got closer, he could see the woman more clearly. She was indeed of Native American heritage, with strong, beautiful features and dark eyes that showed both determination and fear. She was younger than he had initially thought, probably in her early 20s, and despite her precarious situation, there was something regal about her bearing. "Hold on," he shouted over the roar of the water, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "I'm coming." The woman's eyes locked onto his, and he saw a flash of something, surprise perhaps, or hope. She said something in response, but her words were lost in the noise of the river. Michael reached the boulder and grabbed onto the same rock face she was clinging to. Up close, he could see that her hands were scraped and bleeding from holding onto the rough stone, and her lips had a blue tinge that indicated the early stages of hypothermia. "Can you swim?" he shouted. She nodded, but Michael could see that she was exhausted. Whatever had brought her into the river, she had been fighting the current for some time. Her traditional clothing was heavy with water and would make swimming nearly impossible. Michael assessed their options quickly. They couldn't stay where they were. The boulder was unstable, and he could feel it shifting under the pressure of the current. They needed to get ashore, but the direct route would take them through the most dangerous part of the rapids. "Listen to me," he called to her, moving closer so she could hear him better. "We need to swim together. I'm going to help you, but you have to trust me." The woman nodded again, and for a moment their eyes met. In that instant, Michael felt something pass between them, an understanding that went beyond words. She was putting her life in his hands, trusting a complete stranger to save her. Michael positioned himself downstream from her, creating a human anchor. "When I count to 3, let go and grab onto me. 1, 2, 3. The woman released her grip on the boulder, and immediately the current grabbed her. Michael caught her around the waist, feeling the incredible power in her frame, even as the river tried to tear them apart. Together, they were swept into the main channel of the flooding river. What followed was the longest and most terrifying 60 seconds of Michael's life. The current carried them downstream at incredible speed, and all he could do was try to keep both their heads above water while angling toward the eastern shore. Debris slammed into them from all directions, branches, rocks, even what looked like part of a fence. The woman helped as much as she could, kicking strongly despite her waterlogged clothing. Michael could feel her fighting alongside him, and her strength was remarkable. Together, they managed to avoid the worst of the obstacles and gradually work their way toward calmer water near the bank. When they finally reached the shallows, both were exhausted and battered. Michael's lungs burned as he helped the woman wade through the last few feet of current to solid ground. They collapsed on the muddy bank, gasping and shivering in the morning air. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. They simply lay on the wet earth, grateful to be alive and on dry land. Michael's entire body ached from the battering he had taken in the river, and he could only imagine how the woman felt after her longer ordeal. When he finally caught his breath enough to sit up, Michael got his first good look at the person he had just risked his life to save. Even soaked and exhausted, she was striking. Her face had the classic features of the Apache people: high cheekbones, strong jawline, and intelligent dark eyes. Her hair, now plastered to her head, fell past her shoulders, and, despite her obvious fatigue, she carried herself with a dignity that was unmistakable. She was also, as he had noticed from a distance, remarkably tall and powerfully built. Sitting up, she was nearly as tall as Michael was on his knees. Her traditional dress, despite being waterlogged, was beautifully crafted with intricate beadwork and designs that spoke of skilled craftsmanship and cultural significance. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice strong despite everything she had been through. Her English was perfect, with just a trace of an accent that suggested it might not be her first language. "You saved my life. Are you hurt?" Michael asked, looking her over for obvious injuries. "Do you need medical attention?" She shook her head, then winced slightly as she moved her left arm. "Just some scrapes and bruises. Nothing serious." She paused, studying his face intently. "You could have been killed. Why did you do it?" The question caught Michael off guard. In truth, he hadn't really thought about it. When he saw someone in danger, training, and instinct had taken over. "I couldn't just watch you drown," he said simply. The woman continued to study him with those dark, intelligent eyes. There was something in her gaze that made Michael feel as though he was being evaluated, measured against some standard he didn't understand. "What's your name?" she asked. Michael Torres. I'm a park ranger with the state. He gestured toward where he had left his gear upstream. I was checking flood damage when I heard you call for help. Michael Torres, she repeated, as if committing it to memory. I am Ayana Begay. The name suited her, Michael thought. There was something musical about it, and it carried the same dignity that she projected naturally. How did you end up in the river? He asked. If you don't mind me asking. Ayana's expression darkened slightly. I was crossing at the usual ford when the bank gave way. The rain has made everything unstable. She gestured toward the raging water. I have crossed that river hundreds of times, but I have never seen it like this. You're lucky to be alive. That current would have carried you miles downstream. Yes, she said quietly. Very lucky. She looked at him again with that intense, evaluating stare. Or perhaps blessed. Something in her tone made Michael look at her more closely. There was a weight to her words that suggested layers of meaning he wasn't grasping. They sat in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, both recovering from their ordeal. Michael was beginning to worry about getting Ayana to medical attention when he heard voices calling from across the river. A group of people had gathered on the far bank, several men and women in traditional Apache dress, obviously searching for someone. Ayana heard them too and struggled to her feet. Michael jumped up to steady her, surprised again by her height. Standing, she was easily 6 feet tall, maybe 6'1", with broad shoulders and a frame that spoke of both strength and grace. Ayana, one of the voices called across the water. Ayana, where are you? I'm here, she called back, cupping her hand around her mouth to project her voice over the sound of the river. I'm safe. The relief in the voices that answered her was palpable, even from a distance. Michael could see several people pointing in their direction, and animated conversations were breaking out among the group. Your family? He asked. Yes, and others from our community. They have been searching for me. She turned to face him fully. Michael Torres, you have done something today that will not be forgotten. By my people or by me. There was something formal, almost ceremonial, about the way she spoke. Michael had the feeling that he was participating in something significant, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. I need to get back to them, Ayana continued. But this is not the end. There will be more. More. My father will want to meet you. To thank you properly. She paused, and Michael caught a glimpse of something, amusement, maybe, or anticipation, in her expression. Tomorrow, if you are willing. At sunset. Do you know the old trading post on Highway 285? Michael nodded. The abandoned trading post was a local landmark, though it had been closed for years. Meet me there, Ayana said. And Michael Torres? She placed a hand on his shoulder, and he was struck by the strength in her grip. Prepare yourself. You have entered into something that will change your life. Before he could ask what she meant, Ayana was walking upstream along the bank, looking for a safe place to cross back to her people. Michael watched her go, noting the confident way she moved despite her recent ordeal. Even waterlogged and exhausted, there was something almost majestic about her. As he stood alone on the muddy riverbank, gathering his scattered thoughts, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the morning's events had set something in motion that he didn't fully understand. Ayana's words echoed in his mind. You have entered into something that will change your life. Looking back across the raging river, he could see the group of Apache people greeting Ayana's safe return with obvious joy and relief. Even from a distance, their emotions were clear. This wasn't just the rescue of any community member. The woman he had pulled from the river was someone special, someone whose safety mattered deeply to a lot of people. As Michael began the hike back to his vehicle, his wet clothes chafing with every step, he found himself both anticipating and dreading tomorrow's meeting. Something told him that saving Ayana Begay from the river was going to prove to be the easy part of this story. Michael spent the following day in a state of nervous anticipation that he couldn't quite explain. He had returned home the previous evening, showered off the river mud, and tried to process what had happened. On the surface, it was simple. He had rescued someone from drowning, a fairly straightforward act that any decent person would have attempted. But Ayana's words and the way she had looked at him suggested there was more to it than that. He had done some research online about Apache customs and traditions, trying to understand what he might be walking into. What he found was fascinating, but also somewhat intimidating. The Apache people had a rich and complex culture with traditions stretching back centuries. They valued honor, courage, and reciprocity highly, and they had specific customs around debt and gratitude that could be quite formal and binding. As the afternoon wore on, Michael found himself changing clothes 3 times, unsure of what was appropriate for this mysterious meeting. Should he dress formally to show respect? Casually to appear approachable? In the end, he settled on clean jeans, a button-down shirt, and his best boots, respectful but not pretentious. The old trading post sat at the intersection of Highway 285 and a dirt road that led back into Apache territory. Michael had driven past it hundreds of times, but had never really paid attention to the weathered building with its faded signs and boarded-up windows. Now, as he pulled into the empty parking lot just as the sun was beginning to set, the place seemed to take on a different significance. The building itself was a relic from an earlier era, when the trading post had served as a crucial link between Apache communities and the outside world. Hand-painted signs advertised everything from gasoline to groceries to traditional crafts, though most were so faded they were barely legible. Behind the main building, Michael could see the remnants of what had once been a thriving business: storage sheds, a corral, and the concrete foundations of structures that had long since been demolished. Michael parked his truck and waited, unsure whether he should get out or stay in his vehicle. The sun was painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, and the desert landscape seemed to glow with an otherworldly beauty. In the distance, he could see the mountains where Ayana's people lived, their peaks silhouetted against the dramatic sky. He didn't have to wait long. A convoy of vehicles appeared on the dirt road: 3 pickup trucks and what looked like a vintage SUV, all moving slowly and deliberately toward the trading post. Even from a distance, Michael could see that the trucks were decorated with traditional Apache symbols and designs. The vehicles formed a loose semicircle in the parking lot, and Michael counted at least a dozen people as they began to exit. Men and women of various ages, all dressed in a mixture of traditional and modern clothing. Some wore full, traditional regalia with elaborate beadwork and feathers, while others had incorporated traditional elements into more contemporary dress. Ayana emerged from the lead truck, and Michael's breath caught in his throat. If he had thought she was impressive yesterday while soaked and exhausted, today she was absolutely magnificent. She wore a traditional Apache dress of soft doeskin, decorated with intricate beadwork and geometric patterns that seemed to tell story. Her long black hair was elaborately braided with silver ornaments and feathers, and she moved with a grace and confidence that commanded attention. But it was the man who climbed out of the passenger seat that made Michael's heart skip a beat. If Ayana was tall and imposing, her father was absolutely massive. He stood well over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed broad enough to block out the sun, and his presence filled the space around him like a force of nature. His hair was steel gray and worn long in traditional style, and his face bore the weathered lines of someone who had spent decades in the desert sun. He was dressed in full ceremonial regalia, an elaborately decorated shirt and vest, traditional pants with silver conchos, and a magnificent headdress that marked him as a person of significant status within his community. Even without knowing anything about Apache hierarchy, Michael would have recognized this man as a leader. The group approached Michael's truck in formation, with Ayana and her father in the center, and the others arranged around them. Michael took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and stepped out of his vehicle. "Michael Therese," Ayana called out as he approached. Her voice carried clearly across the parking lot, and there was something formal and ceremonial about her tone. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for inviting me," Michael replied, though he was looking at the imposing figure of her father, who was studying him with intense dark eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Michael Therese," Ayana continued, "I would like you to meet my father, Chief Samuel Begay of the Mescaro, Apache Nation." The word chief hit Michael like a physical blow. He had rescued the daughter of a tribal chief. No wonder everyone had been so concerned about her safety, and no wonder this meeting felt so significant. He was dealing with Apache royalty. Chief Begay stepped forward, and Michael was struck by the man's commanding presence. Up close, he was even more impressive. Easily 6'4" with hands that looked like they could crush rocks, and eyes that held depths of wisdom and experience that Michael couldn't begin to fathom. "Michael Torres," the chief said, his voice deep and resonant with the hint of an accent that spoke of a first language other than English. "My daughter tells me that you saved her life yesterday." "I did what anyone would have done," Michael said, though his voice sounded small and inadequate in response to the chief's powerful presence. Chief Begay's expression didn't change, but several of the people behind him exchanged glances. Michael had the feeling he had said something wrong, though he wasn't sure what. "No," the chief said firmly. "Not anyone. You risked your own life to save a stranger. You entered dangerous waters without thought for your own safety. This is not something anyone would do. This is something that only a person of courage and honor would do." The chief paused, studying Michael's face intently. "In our tradition, such an act creates a debt, a sacred obligation. You have given my daughter the gift of life itself, and this cannot go unanswered." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. The way the chief spoke made it clear that this wasn't a simple thank you gesture. This was something much more significant and binding. "I don't need any reward," Michael said quickly. "I'm just glad she's safe." Again, that exchange of glances among the group. Ayana stepped closer, and Michael could see that she was trying not to smile. "Michael Torres," she said gently, "in our culture, refusing a gift is more insulting than refusing to give one. When someone owes you a life debt, you cannot simply dismiss it. It must be acknowledged and properly addressed." Chief Begay nodded approvingly at his daughter's words. "My daughter speaks truly. You have entered into our ways now, whether you intended to or not. The river brought you to us for a reason, and that reason must be honored." The chief gestured to the group behind him. "These are my advisors, my family, and the elders of our community. They have come to witness what transpires here tonight, because what happens here will become part of our history." Michael felt the weight of all those eyes upon him and realized that he was completely out of his depth. This wasn't just a meeting, it was some kind of ceremony, and he was the unwitting participant in something he didn't understand. "I don't know your customs," he said honestly. "I don't want to offend anyone through ignorance." For the first time, Chief Begay's stern expression softened slightly. "Your honesty is refreshing, Michael Torres. Many outsiders pretend to understand our ways when they do not. Your willingness to admit ignorance shows wisdom." The chief turned to address the group behind him in what Michael assumed was Apache. The conversation was brief, but seemed to involve some kind of consensus building, with several of the elders nodding and speaking in turn. Finally, the chief turned back to Michael. "It has been decided," he said formally. "Michael Torres, for saving the life of my daughter, Ayana Begay, I offer you a choice of 3 rewards. Listen carefully, for each choice will change your life in different ways." Michael's heart began to race. This was clearly a significant moment, but he had no idea what he was being offered or what the implications might be. "The first choice," Chief Begay continued, "is material wealth. Land, cattle, money, whatever you need to live comfortably for the rest of your days. Our nation is not poor, and we can provide generously for one who has served us well." Several members of the group nodded approvingly, and Michael got the impression that this was considered a generous and appropriate offer. "The second choice," the chief continued, "is knowledge. You would be welcomed into our community as a student of our ways. Our elders would teach you our history, our traditions, our connection to the land. You would become a bridge between our people and yours, carrying our stories and our wisdom into the world." This option seemed to generate more interest among the group, and Michael could see several of the older members smiling and nodding enthusiastically. "The third choice," Chief Begay said, and his voice took on a different tone, something that might have been amusement, "is the most traditional but also the most unexpected." He paused, and Michael could feel the anticipation in the group. Even Ayana seemed to be holding her breath. "The third choice is my daughter herself." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. Several members of the group chuckled, and Ayana actually blushed, though she kept her composure remarkably well. "Marriage into our family would make you one of us completely," the chief continued, seemingly unaware of Michael's shock. "You would become Apache, with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Your children would be Apache. Your life would be Apache." Michael stood frozen, trying to process what he had just heard. He looked at Ayana, who was watching him with those intelligent dark eyes, and he could see that while she was embarrassed by the directness of her father's offer, she wasn't necessarily opposed to it. Michael began, then stopped. His mind was reeling. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to decide tonight," Chief Begay said, and his tone had softened considerably. "These are choices that deserve careful consideration. But You cannot leave here without choosing one of them. The debt must be acknowledged. One of the elders, an ancient woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries, stepped forward and spoke in Apache to the chief. He listened carefully, then nodded. My grandmother reminds me that the young man should understand what he is choosing, the chief said. Perhaps it would be appropriate for him to spend time with us, to learn our ways, before making his decision. That makes sense, Michael said gratefully. I'd like to understand better what each choice means. Ayanna stepped forward. If you are willing, you could come to our village. Stay with us for a time. See how we live, learn our customs. Then, your choice would be an informed one. Michael looked around at the group of faces watching him. These weren't strangers offering him charity. They were a community, welcoming someone who had earned their respect. Despite his nervousness, he felt drawn to the idea of learning more about these people and their way of life. How long are we talking about? He asked. As long as it takes, Chief Begay replied. Days, weeks, months. Time moves differently in our world than in yours. When you have learned enough to choose wisely, then you will choose. Michael thought about his job, his apartment in Albuquerque, his routine life that suddenly seemed very small and insignificant compared to what was being offered here. I have responsibilities, he said. My job. The Park Service can spare you for a time, the chief said with what might have been a smile. We have more influence than you might think. Your supervisor will be told that you are on special assignment, studying traditional land management practices with our nation, which will be true, in a way. The casual way the chief mentioned having influence with the Park Service reminded Michael that he was dealing with people who had significant political and economic power in the region. The Apache Nation wasn't some isolated group living in the past. They were major players in the modern world. When would I start? Michael asked, and realized as he said it that he had already made his decision. Tomorrow, if you are willing, Ayanna said. I will come to guide you to our village. Michael nodded slowly. Okay, yes, I'll do it. A murmur of approval went through the group, and Chief Begay stepped forward to place a massive hand on Michael's shoulder. You have made a wise choice, Michael Torres. Tomorrow, your real education begins. As the group began to disperse back to their vehicles, Ayanna lingered behind. In the fading light of sunset, she looked ethereal, like something from an ancient legend. Are you sure about this? She asked quietly. Once you enter our world, you cannot pretend that your old life is enough anymore. Everything will change. Michael looked into her dark eyes and felt something shift inside him. Maybe everything needs to change. Ayanna smiled then, the first completely unguarded expression he had seen from her. Tomorrow at dawn. Be ready for anything. As the Apache convoy disappeared into the gathering darkness, Michael stood alone in the parking lot of the old trading post and realized that his life had just taken a turn he could never have imagined. Tomorrow, he would enter a world that most outsiders never saw, and he would have to choose between three paths that would determine the rest of his future. Looking up at the star-filled sky, Michael felt a mixture of excitement and terror that reminded him of the moment he had dove into the raging river. Once again, he was taking a leap into the unknown, trusting in forces beyond his understanding. The only difference was that this time, he was jumping willingly. Michael barely slept that night. He lay in his small apartment in Albuquerque, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything that had happened. By the time his alarm went off at 5 in the morning, he had been awake for hours, alternately excited and terrified about what lay ahead. He packed a bag with no idea what he would need or how long he would be gone. Practical clothes, his hiking boots, a few personal items, everything fit into a single duffel bag, which somehow seemed appropriate. He was leaving his old life behind, at least temporarily, and taking only the essentials. Ayanna arrived precisely at dawn, driving a dusty pickup truck that looked like it had seen decades of hard use in the desert. She was dressed more casually today, jeans, a simple blouse, and boots, but she still carried herself with that same regal bearing that had struck him from the beginning. Ready? She asked as Michael climbed into the passenger seat. I think so, he replied, though he wasn't sure anyone could really be ready for what he was about to experience. The drive took them away from the highway and onto dirt roads that wound deeper and deeper into Apache territory. The landscape was breathtaking. Red rock formations, endless vistas of desert and mountain, and a sense of space that seemed to go on forever. This was land that had remained largely unchanged for centuries, and Michael could feel its ancient power. Tell me about your father, Michael said as they drove. I mean, I know he's a chief, but what does that really mean? Ayana was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. In your world, people measure power by money or political influence. In our world, power comes from wisdom, from connection to the land, and the people from understanding the old ways while navigating the new world. She gestured toward the mountains ahead of them. My father has led our people for 23 years. He has kept our traditions alive while also making sure we prosper in the modern world. Our nation owns businesses, land, natural resources. We are not dependent on anyone, but we choose carefully how we interact with the outside world. And you? What's your role in all of this? Ayana's expression became more complex. That is complicated. I am my father's only child. In traditional Apache society, leadership often passes through the male line, but our nation has always been more flexible than some. I have been educated in both worlds. I have a degree from Stanford in business administration, and I have also been trained in our traditional ways by the elders. Michael could hear the weight of expectation in her voice. That's a lot of pressure. Yes, she said simply. It is, which is why yesterday was so significant. If something had happened to me in that river. She didn't finish the sentence, but Michael understood. He hadn't just saved a person. He had potentially saved the future leadership of an entire nation. The road climbed steadily into the mountains, and after an hour of driving, they reached a gate marked with traditional Apache symbols. Ayana spoke into a radio, and the gate swung open automatically. Beyond it, Michael could see buildings nestled among the trees, a mixture of traditional structures and modern construction that seemed to blend seamlessly with the landscape. "Welcome to our village," Ayana said as they drove through the gate. Very few outsiders have ever seen this place. The community that spread out before them was unlike anything Michael had expected. There were traditional dwellings, wickiups, and hogans built in the old style, alongside modern homes that incorporated traditional design elements. Solar panels glinted on many of the roofs, and he could see satellite dishes and power lines that suggested this wasn't some kind of living museum, but a thriving, contemporary community. People stopped what they were doing to watch as Ayana's truck passed through the village. Michael saw children playing, women working at traditional crafts, men tending to horses and cattle. Everyone seemed to know who he was. Word of the rescue had obviously spread throughout the community. "Where will I be staying?" Michael asked. "With my family," Ayana replied. "It is traditional for honored guests to stay in the chief's home. My father insists." The chief's home turned out to be a large, beautiful structure that combined traditional and modern elements in a way that was both practical and aesthetically pleasing. Adobe walls rose 2 stories, decorated with traditional symbols and surrounded by carefully maintained gardens. Solar panels and modern windows were integrated so seamlessly that they seemed like natural parts of the design. Chief Begay met them at the front door, and Michael was struck again by the man's commanding presence. In daylight, wearing more casual clothes, he was still impressive, tall, broad-shouldered, with intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Michael Torres," the chief said warmly, extending a massive hand. "Welcome to our home. Welcome to our world." The interior of the house was stunning. Traditional Apache artwork covered the walls, paintings, weavings, and carvings that told the story of the people and their connection to the land. But there were also modern conveniences, a large kitchen, comfortable furniture, and technology that kept the family connected to the outside world. "You must be hungry," said a woman's voice, and Michael turned to see an older woman approaching from the kitchen. She was shorter than Ayana, but shared her daughter's strong features and dignified bearing. "Michael, this is my mother, Elena Begay," Ayana said. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and studied Michael with the same intense gaze he had seen from other members of the family. After a moment, she smiled and nodded approvingly. "Any man brave enough to jump into that river to save my daughter is welcome in this house," she said, pulling Michael into an embrace that was both warm and surprisingly strong. "Come, eat. Then, Samuel will show you what you need to see." The meal was simple but delicious, traditional Apache foods prepared with ingredients that had been grown and hunted locally. As they ate, Chief Begay explained what Michael could expect during his stay. "You will live with us as family," he said, "but you will also learn as a student. Our elders will teach you our history, our traditions, our connection to this land. You will work alongside our people, participate in our ceremonies, understand what it truly means to be Apache. And then, I'll be ready to make my choice? Michael asked. Then, you'll understand what each choice really means, the chief corrected. The choosing will still be yours alone. After breakfast, Chief Begay led Michael on a tour of the village. They visited the community center, where children were learning both traditional arts and modern subjects. They saw workshops where artisans created pottery, jewelry, and weavings using techniques passed down through generations. They toured the business offices where the tribe managed their various enterprises, everything from cattle ranching to casino operations to renewable energy projects. People think that maintaining traditions means rejecting the modern world. Chief Begay explained as they walked. This is a false choice. We have learned to take the best of both worlds while keeping our identity intact. At the community center, they met with several elders who would be responsible for Michael's education. There was Maria Santos, a woman in her 70s who served as the keeper of oral traditions. Robert Nach, a man whose family had been tribal leaders for generations. And Thomas Cochise, who specialized in traditional ecological knowledge. Each of them will teach you different aspects of our way of life, Chief Begay explained. But remember, this is not just intellectual knowledge. To truly understand us, you must experience what we experience, feel what we feel. That afternoon, Michael found himself in the workshop of Elena Begay, learning the basics of traditional Apache pottery. It was harder than it looked. The clay seemed to have a mind of its own, and his attempts at creating even simple vessels were clumsy and uneven. Patience, Elena said gently, guiding his hands on the pottery wheel. The clay will teach you what it wants to become. You cannot force it. As he worked, Elena told him stories about her own childhood in the village, about the challenges her people had faced, about the pride she felt in watching the community thrive while maintaining its traditions. My daughter is special, she said casually as Michael struggled with a particularly stubborn piece of clay. She could have chosen to live anywhere, do anything. Universities courted her, companies offered her jobs that would have made her wealthy by anyone's standards. But she chose to stay here, Michael observed. She chose to stay and serve her people, as her father did, and his father before him. This is the Apache way. The good of the community comes before personal desires. That evening, Michael joined the family for dinner, and, for the first time, he began to understand the complexity of the choice he would eventually have to make. This wasn't just a community, it was a way of life that demanded complete commitment. Everything was interconnected, from the individual to the family to the tribe to the land itself. After dinner, Ayana offered to show him around the village on foot. As they walked through the quiet streets, she pointed out various landmarks and explained their significance. That building houses our tribal council, she said, indicating a modern structure built in traditional style. All major decisions are made by consensus among the elders and community leaders. It can be slow, but it ensures that everyone's voice is heard. They passed a group of teenagers gathered around a fire, some playing traditional drums while others used smartphones to record the music. The challenge for my generation, Ayana continued, is maintaining the balance. We want our young people to be successful in the modern world, but we also want them to remember who they are and where they come from. Do many of them leave? Michael asked. Some do, and some come back. The important thing is that they always know they have a home here. They stopped at an overlook that provided a panoramic view of the valley below. In the distance, the lights of cities twinkled like fallen stars, but up here, surrounded by mountains and desert, they felt completely removed from the modern world. Can I ask you something? Michael said. Of course. Your father's offer yesterday, the 3 choices. Was the third one, was that something you knew about ahead of time? Ayana was quiet for a long moment, and Michael wondered if he had overstepped some boundary. Traditional Apache marriages were often arranged for political or economic reasons, she said finally. But my father would never force such a choice on either of us. The offer was made because he respects you, and because he knows that She paused. Because you what? Because I would not object to learning more about the man who risked his life to save mine, she said quietly. They stood in comfortable silence, looking out over the vast landscape. Michael felt something stirring inside him. Not just attraction to this remarkable woman, but a deeper pull toward this place and these people. This is going to be harder than I thought, he said. What is? Making a choice. Yesterday, I thought I was just saving someone from drowning. Now I'm being offered three completely different futures, and I'm starting to realize that any one of them would change everything about who I am." Ayana turned to face him, her expression serious in the moonlight. "Change isn't always bad, Michael. Sometimes it's the only way to become who you're meant to be." Over the following days, Michael threw himself into learning everything he could about Apache life. He worked alongside the men herding cattle in the high country, learning traditional techniques for managing the land that had been developed over centuries. He sat with the elders in the evenings, listening to stories that stretched back to the time when the Apache were nomadic warriors ranging across the entire Southwest. Maria Santos taught him about the oral traditions that preserve the tribe's history and wisdom. "Books can be burned," she explained. "Buildings can be destroyed. But stories live in people's hearts, and as long as there are people to tell them, they survive." Robert Naich showed him the business side of the modern Apache nation, the careful balance of traditional values and contemporary economic necessities. "We could be rich from casino revenues alone," he explained. "But wealth without purpose is meaningless. Every dollar we earn is invested in our community, our culture, our future." Thomas Cochise took him into the wilderness to learn traditional ecological knowledge, how to read the signs in nature, how to understand the interconnections between all living things, how to take only what was needed and give back more than was taken. "The land is not something we own," Thomas explained as they tracked elk through mountain meadows. "We are part of it, and it is part of us. This understanding shapes everything about how we live." But it was his time with the Begay family that affected Michael most deeply. Chief Samuel, Elena, and Ayana welcomed him not as a guest, but as a family member. He ate meals with them, participated in their daily routines, and gradually began to understand the bonds that held this community together. Elena treated him like a son, fussing over his clothes and making sure he ate enough. Chief Samuel included him in discussions about tribal business and asked for his perspectives on various issues. And Ayana was becoming more than just the woman he had rescued from the river. She was brilliant, passionate about her people and their future, and completely committed to bridging the gap between tradition and modernity. She spoke 3 languages fluently, could discuss global economics as easily as traditional ecological practices, and move between the Apache and outside worlds with equal comfort. But more than that, she was kind, funny, and surprisingly easy to talk to. They spent hours walking through the mountains, discussing everything from philosophy to practical politics to their dreams for the future. Michael found himself looking forward to these conversations more than anything else in his day. After 2 weeks in the village, Michael was beginning to understand the magnitude of the choice he would eventually have to make. The first option, material wealth, now seemed almost insulting. These people were offering him something far more valuable than money. The second option, becoming a student and bridge between worlds, was deeply appealing. He could see himself learning from the elders for years, then carrying that knowledge back to the outside world to help others understand Apache wisdom and perspectives. But the third option, marriage into the family and complete integration into Apache life, was becoming more attractive every day, not just because of his growing feelings for Ayana, but because this way of life spoke to something deep inside him that he hadn't even known existed. As the third week of his stay drew to a close, Michael knew he would have to make his choice soon. Chief Begay had been patient, but he could sense that the time for decision was approaching. That night, as he lay in the guest room of the chief's house, Michael stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine his 3 possible futures. In one, he returned to his old life wealthy, but essentially unchanged. In another, he became a teacher and ambassador, living partially in both worlds but fully belonging to neither. In the third, he committed completely to a new life and a new identity, leaving his old self behind forever. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Michael realized that his heart had already made the choice. The only question now was whether he had the courage to follow it. The 4th week of Michael's stay began with an unexpected announcement. Chief Begay gathered the family at breakfast and informed them that the community would be participating in a traditional ceremony, a vision quest that hadn't been performed in nearly a decade. The elders have been discussing this for some time, the chief explained, his expression more serious than Michael had seen it. They believe the signs are right, and that certain young people in our community are ready for this experience. Michael looked around the table, noting the solemn expressions on everyone's faces. Even Ayana seemed subdued, which was unusual for her typically confident demeanor. What exactly is a vision quest? Michael asked. It is a rite of passage, Elena explained gently. A time of solitude, fasting, and prayer in which a person seeks guidance from the spirits about their path in life. Traditionally, it's done by young people coming of age, Chief Begay added. But the elders have decided that you should participate as well, Michael. They believe you need to understand this aspect of our culture before you can make your choice. Michael felt his stomach tighten. How long does it last? 4 days and 4 nights, Ayana said quietly. Alone in the wilderness, with only water and the clothes on your back. The idea was both terrifying and intriguing. Michael had done plenty of wilderness camping, but never anything like this. No food, no shelter, no contact with other people for 4 days. What am I supposed to do during those 4 days, he asked. That depends on what the spirits have to teach you, Thomas Cochise said, appearing in the doorway. The elderly man had apparently been invited to explain the ceremony. Some people receive visions. Others hear voices. Still others simply find clarity about questions that have been troubling them. And some people, Chief Begay added with a slight smile, just spend 4 days being very hungry and learning that they're stronger than they thought they were. Over the next few days, Michael underwent preparation for the vision quest. Thomas taught him traditional prayers and meditation techniques. Maria Santos explained the spiritual significance of the ceremony and what he might expect to experience. Robert Naich gave him practical advice about surviving in the wilderness with minimal resources. The hunger will be difficult, Robert warned. By the 3rd day, you'll feel weak and lightheaded. This is normal. The fasting is part of the process. It opens your mind to experiences that are blocked when you're focused on physical comfort. What if I can't handle it? Michael asked. What if I have to come back early? Then, you come back early, Chief Begay said simply. There's no shame in recognizing your limits. But I don't think that will be necessary. You jumped into a raging river to save my daughter. I think you can handle 4 days in the mountains. The night before the ceremony was to begin, Ayana asked Michael to walk with her through the village one more time. They ended up at the overlook where they had talked on his first night, sitting on a fallen log and looking out over the star-filled sky. Are you nervous? She asked. Terrified, Michael admitted. I keep thinking about what might happen out there. What if I have some kind of breakdown? What if I see things that aren't real? What if I don't see anything at all? Ayana was quiet for a moment, then reached over and took his hand. Her touch was warm and steady, and Michael felt some of his anxiety ease. The vision quest isn't about seeing magical things, she said softly. It's about stripping away everything that distracts you from hearing your own heart. When you're hungry, tired, and alone, you can't lie to yourself anymore. Whatever truth you find out there, it will be your truth. Did you do a vision quest? When I was 18, I spent 4 days on that ridge over there. She pointed to a distant mountain peak, trying to decide whether to accept the scholarship to Stanford or stay here and marry Jimmy Crow Feather. Michael felt a stab of something that might have been jealousy. Who's Jimmy Crow Feather? Ayana laughed. A boy I thought I loved when I was 18. Very handsome, very traditional, very wrong for me. The vision quest helped me see that I needed to go out into the world before I could come back and serve my people properly. And Jimmy? Married someone much better suited to him and moved to Phoenix, where he sells insurance and coaches Little League Baseball. We're still friends. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and looking at the stars. Michael tried to memorize the moment. The feel of her hand in his, the sound of the wind through the pines, the vast canopy of stars overhead. Ayana, he said finally, when I come back from this vision quest, I'm going to have to make my choice. Yes, I need you to know that whatever I choose, these weeks with your family have been the most meaningful of my life. You've all given me something I didn't even know I was missing. She squeezed his hand. What's that? A sense of belonging, purpose, connection to something bigger than myself. He paused. I've been living my whole life like I was waiting for something to begin, and I didn't realize what I was waiting for until I found it here. Ayana turned to face him in the starlight. Michael, I need you to promise me something. What? Promise me that whatever choice you make, you'll make it for yourself, not for me or my family or what you think we want. This has to be your decision. based on what you truly want for your life. But what if what I want isn't what's best for your people? Then, that's something we'll figure out together. But first, you have to know what you want. The next morning, Michael was awakened before dawn for the beginning of the ceremony. He dressed in simple clothes, jeans, a cotton shirt, boots, and a light jacket, and met the others at the edge of the village. There were 3 other participants, 2 young men from the community who were 18 years old, and Ayana herself. Michael was surprised to see her among the group. "I thought you had already done this," he said as they gathered around a small fire where Thomas Cochise was conducting prayers. "I did, but I asked the elders for permission to go again. Sometimes people do multiple vision quests at important transition points in their lives." Thomas completed his prayers and turned to address the group. "You will each go to a different location. You will remain there for 4 days and 4 nights. You may drink water, but you will eat nothing. You may sleep, but you should spend time in prayer and meditation. Listen to what the land has to teach you. Listen to what your heart has to teach you." He assigned each person a different area of the wilderness, places that were sacred to the tribe and had been used for vision quests for generations. Michael's destination was a small canyon about 5 miles from the village, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through rocky terrain. "This place is called the Canyon of Echoes," Thomas explained as he showed Michael the location on a map. "It's a place where sound carries in strange ways, where the walls seem to speak to those who know how to listen." Chief Begay and Elena came to say goodbye, along with several other families seeing off the younger participants. Elena embraced Michael warmly and whispered something in Apache that he didn't understand, but that felt like a blessing. "Remember," Chief Begay said, placing his heavy hand on Michael's shoulder, "the purpose of this journey is not to prove anything to us. It's to discover something about yourself." Michael shouldered his simple pack, a water bottle, a blanket, and nothing else, and set off on the trail toward his assigned canyon. The morning was cool and clear, and the 5-mile hike gave him time to think about what lay ahead. The Canyon of Echoes was everything Thomas had promised, a narrow cleft in the red rock walls where sound seemed to bounce and multiply in impossible ways. Water trickled down the walls from hidden springs, creating small pools and patches of green vegetation. It was beautiful, peaceful, and utterly isolated. Michael found a flat area near the center of the canyon and set up his simple camp. He spread his blanket on the ground, filled his water bottle from one of the springs, and sat down to begin his vigil. The first day was easier than he had expected. He spent time exploring the canyon, examining the rock formations and the plants that grew in the sheltered environment. He tried to meditate as Thomas had taught him, focusing on his breathing and trying to quiet his mind. As evening approached, he began to feel the effects of not eating. His stomach cramped with hunger, and he found himself thinking obsessively about food. He tried to remember the teachings of the elders, that hunger was part of the process, that it helped clear the mind of distractions. The first night was cold and restless. Every sound seemed amplified in the canyon. The trickle of water, the rustle of wind through the vegetation, the distant cry of coyotes. Michael dozed fitfully, waking frequently, and staring up at the stars visible through the narrow opening far overhead. The second day brought new challenges. The hunger had settled into a constant, gnawing presence, and Michael felt weak and lightheaded. He forced himself to continue his meditations, trying to focus on the questions that had brought him here. What did he want from his life? What was he meant to do with the opportunities he had been given? How could he honor the debt he owed to Ayana and her family? As the hours passed, Michael found his thoughts becoming clearer, more focused. The constant chatter in his mind, worries about work, about money, about what other people thought of him, began to fade away. In its place, deeper questions emerged. Who was he, really? What values did he want to guide his life? What legacy did he want to leave behind? The second night was even more difficult than the first. Michael's dreams were vivid and strange, filled with images of the river where he had met Ayana, the faces of her family, the vast landscapes of Apache territory. He woke several times feeling disoriented, unsure of where he was or how long he had been sleeping. By the third day, Michael was genuinely struggling. He felt weak and dizzy, and several times he had to sit down to avoid falling. But something interesting was happening to his mind. The constant noise of thoughts and worries had been replaced by a kind of clarity he had never experienced before. He spent hours sitting by one of the spring-fed pools, watching the play of light on the water and thinking about the path that had led him to this place. Every decision he had made, every twist of fate, had brought him to that moment when he saw Iona in the river. It was as if his entire life had been preparation for that single act of courage. But what came next? What was he supposed to do with the opportunity that had been given to him? As evening approached on the third day, Michael was sitting in meditation when he heard something that made him open his eyes. It was a voice, clear and distinct, though he couldn't tell where it was coming from. "Why are you here?" the voice asked. Michael looked around the canyon, but he was clearly alone. The voice seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, echoing and re-echoing until it filled the entire space. "I'm here to learn," he said aloud, feeling somewhat foolish. "Learn what? What I'm supposed to do with my life. How to make the right choice. And what do you think the right choice is?" Michael was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. When he finally spoke, the words seemed to come from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "The right choice is the one that serves something bigger than myself. The one that honors the gift I've been given and uses it to make the world a little better. And which of your three options does that?" Again, Michael considered carefully before answering. "All of them could, depending on how I approach them. But only one of them feels like home." "Which one?" "The one that scares me the most. The one that requires me to give up everything I thought I was and become something new." The voice was quiet then, and Michael realized that he had been having a conversation with himself, his own thoughts reflected and amplified by the strange acoustics of the canyon. But somehow that made the conversation more meaningful, not less. He spent the rest of the night in deep meditation, and when morning came, he felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The hunger was still there, the weakness and dizziness, but underneath it was a sense of peace and certainty that he had never experienced before. The fourth day passed in a kind of dream state. Michael felt disconnected from his physical body, floating in a space between sleeping and waking where the boundaries between internal and external reality seemed to dissolve. He saw visions, not supernatural appearances, but moments of perfect clarity where he understood truths that had been hidden from him before. He saw himself as a child, already searching for something he couldn't name. He saw his years of education and work, always feeling like he was preparing for something without knowing what. He saw the moment when he dove into the river and understood that it hadn't been a split-second decision, but the culmination of everything he had been becoming. And he saw his possible futures spreading out before him like paths through a vast landscape. He could see where each path led, what each choice would require of him, what each would give back to him. When the fourth night finally ended and dawn broke over the canyon rim, Michael knew what his choice would be. He felt weak and lightheaded, his body depleted by 4 days without food, but his mind was crystal clear. He packed his blanket, filled his water bottle one last time from the spring, and began the long walk back to the village. With each step, he felt himself returning to the ordinary world, but he carried the clarity of the vision quest with him like a flame that would never be extinguished. By the time he reached the village, the other participants had already returned. Iona was waiting for him at the edge of the community, and when she saw him coming up the trail, she ran to meet him. "How do you feel?" she asked, studying his face with those intelligent dark eyes. "Different," Michael said simply. "Ready. Ready for what?" "Ready to make my choice." That evening, the entire community gathered for the traditional feast that followed a vision quest. Michael ate slowly, his stomach no longer accustomed to solid food, but every bite tasted like the most delicious thing he had ever experienced. When the meal was finished, Chief Begay stood and addressed the gathering. "Our brother Michael Torres has completed his vision quest. He has walked alone in the wilderness and listened to what the spirits had to teach him. Now, if he is ready, it is time for him to make his choice." Michael stood up on unsteady legs, feeling the eyes of the entire community upon him. These people had welcomed him, taught him, and offered him opportunities beyond his wildest dreams. Now it was time to honor that gift with his decision. "I have learned much during my time with your people," he began, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet gathering place. "I have learned about honor, about courage, about what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself. I have learned that there are different kinds of wealth, and that the most valuable things in life cannot be bought or sold." He paused, looking around at the faces surrounding him, faces that had become familiar and dear to him over the past month. Chief Begay, you offered me 3 choices, and each one would be a great honor. But I've learned that the greatest honor is not in taking what is offered, but in giving what is needed. A murmur went through the crowd, and Michael saw Chief Begay lean forward with interest. If you will have me, Michael continued, I choose to become Apache, not because of what I will gain, but because of what I can give. I want to learn your ways completely, serve your people, and help build bridges between your world and mine. I want to raise Apache children who will carry on your traditions while also succeeding in a modern world. He turned to look directly at Ayana, who was watching him with tears in her eyes. And if Ayana will have me, I want to do all of this as her husband, her partner, and her equal in all things. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then Chief Begay stood and began to speak in Apache, his voice deep and resonant with emotion. The crowd responded with calls and exclamations that Michael didn't understand, but that sounded like approval. Finally, Ayana stood and walked toward him. When she reached him, she took his hands in hers and looked into his eyes. Yes, she said simply. Yes to all of it. The celebration that followed lasted until dawn. Michael found himself embraced, congratulated, and welcomed by people who had been strangers a month ago, but who now felt like family. He was no longer an outsider looking in. He was home. 6 months later, Michael stood at the edge of the same river where he had first met Ayana, but everything had changed. The spring runoff had subsided, leaving the Pecos flowing peacefully between its banks, a gentle stream that bore no resemblance to the raging torrent that had nearly claimed a life and instead had given him a new one. The wedding ceremony had taken place a month after his vision quest, combining traditional Apache rituals with elements that honored Michael's own heritage. Chief Begay had conducted the ceremony himself, speaking in both Apache and English as the entire community witnessed Michael and Ayana pledge their lives to each other and to the people they would serve together. The months that followed had been a whirlwind of learning and adaptation. Michael had resigned from his job with the Park Service and thrown himself completely into his new life. He was learning Apache language and customs, studying the complex business operations of the tribal nation, and working alongside Chief Begay to understand the responsibilities that would one day fall to him and Ayana. It hadn't been easy. There were cultural nuances that he struggled to grasp, traditions that seemed foreign to his upbringing, and moments when he wondered if he had bitten off more than he could chew. But every challenge was balanced by moments of profound satisfaction, times when he felt the deep connections that bound this community together, when he understood the wisdom embedded in practices that had sustained the Apache people for centuries. Today marked a special milestone. Chief Begay had announced that Michael would be formally adopted into the tribe in a ceremony that would make him legally and spiritually Apache. It was an honor that few outsiders had ever received, and one that came with serious responsibilities. Are you nervous? Ayana asked, joining him by the river. She was dressed in traditional regalia for the ceremony, a beautiful doeskin dress decorated with elaborate beadwork, her hair braided with silver ornaments and eagle feathers. Even after months of marriage, Michael still felt his breath catch when he looked at her. Terrified, he admitted, "What if I mess up this ceremony? What if I say something wrong?" Ayana laughed, the sound carrying across the water like music. "You jumped into a raging river without thinking twice, but you're worried about a ceremony? The river was just dangerous. This is permanent. After today, I'll be Apache. There's no going back to my old life. Do you want to go back?" Michael considered the question, looking out over the peaceful landscape that had become his home. In the distance, he could see the village where they lived, where their children would grow up learning both traditional ways and modern skills. He thought about his small apartment in Albuquerque, his routine job with the Park Service, his old life that had felt like he was marking time rather than truly living. "No," he said finally, "I don't want to go back, but I want to make sure I'm worthy of what I'm being given." Ayana moved closer and took his hand. "You've already proven your worth, not just by saving my life, but by how you've embraced our ways, how you've worked to understand our people, how you've shown respect for our traditions while bringing your own strengths to our community." She was right, Michael knew. The past 6 months had shown him that his integration into Apache society wasn't just about learning their ways. It was also about contributing his own skills and perspectives. His background in environmental science had already proven valuable in several tribal projects, and his experience with government agencies had helped smooth some bureaucratic obstacles the tribe had been facing. "My father says you have the heart of a warrior and the mind of a diplomat," Iona continued. "He thinks you make a good chief someday." The word chief still gave Michael pause. In traditional Apache society, leadership wasn't inherited automatically. It was earned through service and the respect of the people. But as Iona's husband and the daughter of the current chief, he would inevitably be looked to for leadership in the future. "I still can't believe your father is okay with his daughter marrying a complete outsider," Michael said. "You're not an outsider anymore. And my father is a wise man. He knows that strong communities need fresh perspectives, new ideas. The Apache have survived for centuries by adapting and evolving while maintaining their core identity." They walked hand in hand back toward the village, where preparations for the adoption ceremony were already underway. The entire community would participate, along with visitors from other Apache communities and even some government officials who had developed working relationships with Chief Begay's administration. Michael's own family would be there too. His parents had flown in from California, still somewhat bewildered by their son's dramatic life change, but supportive nonetheless. It had taken several long conversations to help them understand that this wasn't a rejection of his upbringing, but an expansion of it. The ceremony itself was beautiful and moving. Chief Begay spoke eloquently about the significance of adoption into the tribe, how it created bonds that were as strong as blood and obligations that lasted for generations. Michael repeated traditional vows in halting Apache, promising to serve the people, protect the land, and honor the ancestors. When it was over, he was no longer Michael Torres, the park ranger. He was Michael Torres Begay, member of the Mescalero Apache Nation, son-in-law of the chief, and heir to responsibilities he was still learning to understand. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night. There was traditional dancing, drumming, and storytelling. Michael's parents looked somewhat overwhelmed, but were clearly trying their best to appreciate the significance of what was happening. His mother had tears in her eyes when Elena Begay officially welcomed her as family. "I never understood why Michael seemed so restless before," his father confided to Chief Begay during a quiet moment. "He had a good job, a nice apartment, everything a young man should want. But he never seemed truly happy. Some people are born knowing exactly where they belong," Chief Begay replied. "Others have to travel far from home to discover their true home. Your son had the courage to recognize his path when it appeared, even though it led him to an unexpected destination." As the evening wound down, Michael found himself sitting with a group of tribal elders, listening to stories about the old days and the challenges the Apache had faced over the generations. Thomas Cochise was telling about the time when government agents had tried to force Apache children into boarding schools designed to kill the Indian and save the man. "They thought they could destroy our culture by taking our children," Thomas said. "But culture isn't just about language or ceremonies. It's about how we see the world, how we treat each other, how we understand our place in the circle of life. Those things can't be destroyed by outside forces. They can only be abandoned from within." An elderly woman named Grace Chirikawa nodded in agreement. "That's why adoption ceremonies like tonight are so important. They show that our culture is strong enough to welcome new people, to grow and change while staying true to its essence." "But how do you maintain that balance?" Michael asked. "How do you preserve traditions while also adapting to a changing world?" Grace smiled. "That's the question every generation has to answer for itself. Our grandparents had to figure out how to survive when the government forced us onto reservations. Our parents had to learn how to succeed in modern America without losing their identity. Now it's your generation's turn to find the way forward. What's the biggest challenge facing young Apache people today?" Michael asked. Robert Nach, who had been quiet during most of the conversation, spoke up. "The same challenge facing young people everywhere, finding meaning and purpose in a world that often seems to value only material success. Our culture offers something different, a way of life based on community, respect for the land, and understanding that we are all connected. But many young people are attracted to the opportunities in the outside world," added Maria Santos. "Good jobs, bright lights, excitement. The challenge is showing them that they can have success and opportunity while still being Apache." Michael thought about this as he and Iona walked home through the quiet village. Their house was a wedding gift from Chief Begay, a beautiful home that incorporated traditional design elements with modern conveniences. Solar panels powered efficient appliances, while traditional artwork and crafts created an atmosphere that honored the past while embracing the future. "Do you ever worry about our children?" Michael asked as they sat on their porch, looking up at the star-filled sky. "About how they'll navigate between the Apache world and the outside world?" "Every day," Ayana replied. "But I think about how my parents raised me, giving me the foundation of our traditions while also preparing me to succeed anywhere in the world. That's what we'll do for our children too." Michael nodded, thinking about the life they were building together. In the months since their marriage, he had thrown himself into learning everything he could about Apache culture and history. He was studying the language intensively, working with tribal elders to understand traditional ecological knowledge, and slowly taking on more responsibilities in the tribal government. Chief Begay had begun including him in important meetings and decisions, treating him not as an outsider who had married into the family, but as a genuine partner in leadership. It was both an honor and a tremendous responsibility. "I've been thinking about something," Michael said. "Your father mentioned that the tribe is considering expanding the cultural education programs for young people. What if we created an exchange program, bringing non-Apache students here to learn about traditional ways, while sending Apache students to universities and internships in the outside world?" Ayana turned to look at him with interest. "That's an interesting idea. It would help outsiders understand us better while giving our young people more opportunities. And it would create bridges, real relationships between our community and the outside world, based on mutual respect and understanding rather than stereotypes and misconceptions." They talked late into the night about possibilities for the future, ways to strengthen Apache culture while also engaging with the broader world, programs that could benefit both communities, and dreams for the children they hoped to have someday. As the months passed, Michael's life settled into new rhythms. He worked closely with Chief Begay on tribal business, learning the complex balance of maintaining sovereignty while cooperating with state and federal governments. He helped Elena with community development projects, using his environmental science background to support sustainable development initiatives. And he spent countless hours with the elders, absorbing traditional knowledge and stories that had been passed down through generations. The adoption ceremony had been just the beginning. Real integration into Apache society was an ongoing process that required patience, humility, and genuine commitment. There were still moments when Michael felt like an outsider, when cultural nuances escaped him, or when his different background created misunderstandings. But there were also moments of profound connection, times when he felt the deep sense of belonging that had drawn him to this way of life in the first place. During traditional ceremonies, working alongside community members on practical projects, or simply sitting with Ayana's family around the dinner table, Michael experienced a sense of purpose and connection that he had never found in his old life. A year after the adoption ceremony, Ayana announced that she was pregnant with her first child. The news was greeted with joy throughout the community. This baby would represent the future of Apache tradition, a new generation that would carry forward both ancient wisdom and modern capabilities. "Have you thought about names?" Elena asked during one of their regular family dinners. "We're considering traditional Apache names," Ayana replied. "Something that honors our heritage while also working in the modern world." "What about middle names?" Michael asked. "Could we use names that honor both sides of our family?" Chief Begay smiled approvingly. "That would be fitting. This child will be a bridge between worlds, just as you have become." As Ayana's pregnancy progressed, Michael found himself thinking more and more about the legacy he wanted to leave for his children. He wanted them to be proud of their Apache heritage while also being prepared to succeed in whatever path they chose. He wanted them to understand the value of community and tradition while also having the skills to navigate an increasingly complex world. The baby was born on a crisp autumn morning, just as the aspen trees in the mountains were turning gold. She was a healthy, beautiful girl with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond her hours. They named her Elena Ayana Begay Torres, honoring her grandmother, her mother, and both sides of her heritage. Chief Begay held his granddaughter with tears in his eyes, speaking softly to her in Apache and welcoming her to the community that would help shape her future. "She is the future," he said to Michael. "Your daughter and her generation will face challenges we can't even imagine. But they will also have opportunities that previous generations could only dream of. As Michael held his daughter for the first time, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. A split-second decision to help a stranger in danger had led to a complete transformation of his life. He had gained not just a wife and family, but a purpose and identity that gave meaning to every day. The river that had nearly claimed Ayana's life had instead become the source of new life. Their marriage, their daughter, and the bridges they were building between communities. It was a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous currents can carry us to exactly where we need to be. 2 years later, Michael stood once again by the Pecos River, but this time he wasn't alone. Chief Begay was retiring, and the tribal council had unanimously chosen Michael and Ayana to share leadership responsibilities. It was an arrangement that honored both traditional Apache governance structures and the realities of modern tribal administration. "Are you ready for this?" Ayana asked, adjusting little Elena in her arms. Their daughter was now a toddler, chattering happily in a mixture of Apache and English as she watched the water flow past. "As ready as anyone can be for something they never imagined," Michael replied. "A few years ago, I was just a park ranger checking flood damage. Now I'm about to become a tribal leader." "Not just any tribal leader," Ayana corrected. "You're about to help lead a people who have survived and thrived for centuries, who have adapted to countless changes while maintaining their essential identity." Chief Begay joined them by the river, moving more slowly now, but still carrying himself with the dignity that had always defined him. "Do you have any advice for us?" Michael asked his father-in-law. "Remember that leadership is service, not privilege. Remember that every decision you make should consider its impact 7 generations into the future. And remember that the strength of our people comes not from avoiding change, but from choosing which changes to embrace and which to resist." As they walked back toward the village where Michael would soon take on formal leadership responsibilities, he reflected on the unpredictability of life. He had come to this place as a stranger, drawn by duty to check on flood damage. He was returning as a leader, bound by love and commitment to help guide a community into an uncertain but promising future. The old trading post where he had first met Chief Begay was visible in the distance, now renovated and serving as a cultural center where Apache and non-Apache visitors could learn about traditional ways and contemporary realities. It had become a symbol of the bridges they were building, connections based on mutual respect and understanding. That evening, at the ceremony marking the transfer of leadership, Michael stood before the assembled community and spoke about his vision for the future. "When I first came here," he said, "I thought I was rescuing someone from a river. I didn't realize that I was the one being rescued from a life that was safe but empty, comfortable but meaningless. This community has given me purpose, identity, and the chance to be part of something larger than myself." He paused, looking out over the faces of people who had become his family, his friends, his responsibility. "Now, together with Ayana, I pledge to serve this community as it has served me, to protect our traditions while embracing beneficial changes, to build bridges with the outside world while maintaining our sovereignty and identity, to ensure that our children and grandchildren inherit not just our land and our culture, but also the tools they need to thrive in whatever world they will inhabit." As the ceremony concluded and the celebration began, Michael found himself thinking about the moment that had started it all. If he had driven a different route that morning, if he had been delayed by even a few minutes, if he had hesitated before jumping into the river, his entire life would have been different. But he hadn't hesitated. When he saw someone in danger, he had acted without thinking about the consequences. That single act of courage had opened doors he never could have imagined, led him to love he never could have expected, and given him a purpose that fulfilled him in ways his old life never could have. Standing by the river with his wife and daughter, surrounded by a community that had welcomed him as family, Michael understood that sometimes the most important decisions are made not through careful planning, but through the courage to act when action is needed. The river continued to flow past them, carrying away the old and bringing in the new, just as it had for centuries. But now it carried with it the story of two people whose lives had been forever changed by a moment of crisis that became a moment of transformation. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, Michael held his daughter up to see them, speaking to her in the Apache words he had worked so hard to learn. "Look, little one," he whispered. "Those are the same stars your ancestors watched for generations. They will guide you, just as they guided me to this place, to this family, to this life that I never could have imagined but cannot imagine living without." The river whispered its ancient song. The stars shone down on the peaceful village, and Michael Torres Begay, park ranger turned Apache leader, outsider turned family member, rescuer turned rescued, smiled as he contemplated the mysterious currents that had carried him home.